the man who got up 2 hours ago talking about a 24-second shot clock just said that he don't honor time. What Jackson family, your heart has to be beating, just beaming to know how much we all love the Reverend. It's got to be. It's got to be. And I'm with that thing. Y'all will always be our royal family, our first family, because y'all the Jacksons, y'all royalty. Well, I get the opportunity to introduce my seatmate from the Senate, who came on to be the 44th President of the United States. Chicago, ladies and gentlemen, President Barack Obama.
It's good to be home. I love you back. The book of Isaiah. Where are you at? Now, see, I believe in the Constitution. The book of Isaiah God is looking for a messenger to guide a hardened and resistant people. And the Lord asks, whom shall I send? And who will go with us? To which Isaiah replies, here I am, Lord. Send me. To Mother Jackson and the Jackson family, to President and Mrs. Biden, President and Secretary Clinton, Vice President Harris, Pastor Dates, my old friend, though he looking good, Reverend Meeks, Reverend Jenkins. It is an honor to join you today to celebrate the Reverend Jesse Jackson, a man who, when the poor and the dispossessed needed a champion, and a country needed healing, stepped forward again and again and again and said, send me. Reverend Jackson's immense gifts were apparent at an early age, even if his circumstances conspired to try to hold him back. Born out of wedlock to a teenage mom, growing up under the oppressive cloud of segregation, confined to schools, sports facilities, movie theaters that were separate and unequal. It was a world where on Thanksgiving he'd have to wait for his mother to come home on the bus carrying leftovers from the dinner she had to cook for somebody else. A world designed to tell a child that he or she could only go so far. That to think otherwise would be foolish or dangerous, and that wisdom required you to accept your lot in life. And young Jesse refused to accept that verdict. He was a born leader, an athlete, a talker, knew how to talk, star quarterback, student body president. He could have succeeded within the confines that were determined for him and had a successful life. But like so many of his generation, so many extraordinary civil rights leaders in the late 50s and 60s, that Joshua generation, he instinctively understood that individual success meant nothing unless everybody was free. So he became inspired by the bus boycotts in Montgomery. He led 7 black students into the whites-only library, sitting down and getting arrested for reading. Think about that. The library closed, but then it reopened. And when it did, it was open to everyone. Send me, Jesse said, even as a young man, and the world got a little bit better. By the time Reverend Jackson graduated from college, he had attended Chicago Theological Seminary. He knew the nature of his calling, and he became, as everybody knows, the youngest member of SCLC, assigned to lead Operation Breadbasket here in Chicago, right around the time that Isaiah Thomas is talking about. And it was during this period, and especially after Dr. King's death, when the optimism of the early movement had begun to fade and leadership had begun to fracture, and when the country seemed to have grown bored, gotten weary of the idea of justice and equality, and moved on to other concerns, that Reverend Jackson rose above despair and kept that righteous flame alive. Through Operation Push, he led boycotts and challenged corporate policies around hiring and contracting, recognizing that civil rights without economic justice was an empty promise. He backed unions in their organizing efforts and activists in fair wage campaigns, understanding that if the have-nots and the have-little bits ever learned to make common cause across racial lines instead of fighting each other over breadcrumbs, everybody would benefit. He helped register millions of voters. He fought against biases in the criminal justice system. He drew attention to local abuses of power and called folks at the national level to account. And by the early 80s, he was delivering that message of change and hope across the globe, freeing hostages from captivity, fighting to end apartheid in South Africa, And then, in 1984, as the powers that be in Washington were rolling back hard-won progress, slashing the social safety net, when more and more folks were getting left behind, and greed was being trumpeted as a virtue. See, we've been there before. He stepped forward once again and said, "Send me." He ran for the presidency of the United States of America. I had just graduated from college during that first campaign. And I was living in New York at the time. I was working to pay off my student loans, eating a lot of tuna fish and Campbell soup. And if I went to a diner, I'd grab some extra crackers, put them in my pocket. And I was inspired by the civil rights movement. And I had in my mind to work for social justice. But even though I was full of good intentions, I was uncertain of how to serve and fighting off self-doubt. And I remember how, at the time, plenty of people, including, plenty of black folks, were dismissing Jesse's chances, suggesting, oh, he just wants attention, he can only get black votes. But then I remember one night sitting in my janky apartment, and I got an old black and white TV with the rabbit ears, and I'm kind of jiggering around, and it's about this big. I know young people can't imagine, but the TV was about this big. And I'm watching the Democratic primary debate between him and Walter Mondale and Gary Hart. And I remember how, when that debate was over, I turned off that TV and I thought the same thing that I know a lot of people thought that night, even if they didn't want to admit it. That in his ideas, in his platform, in his analysis, in his intelligence, in his insight, Jesse hadn't just held his own. He had owned that stage. He wasn't an intruder. He wasn't a pretender. He belonged on that stage. And the message he sent to a 22-year-old child of a single mother with a funny name, an outsider, was that maybe there wasn't any place, any room where we didn't belong. And that message of fairness and dignity, of justice and hope, that's what the Rainbow Coalition was all about. In 1984, and then again in 1988, Jesse didn't just speak to black folks, he spoke to white folks and Latinos and Asian Americans and the first Americans. He spoke to family farmers and environmentalists. He spoke to gay rights activists when nobody was talking to gay rights activists, and blue-collar workers. And he gave them the same message, that they mattered, that their voices and their votes counted. He invited them to believe. He invited us to believe in our own power, to change America for the better. By the delegate count, Jesse's two candidacies ultimately came up short. But he paved the road for so many others to follow. Doug Wilder became the first elected black governor. Carol Moseley Braun went to the U.S. Senate. Because of Jesse, the Democratic Party changed its rules, ending the winner-take-all distribution of delegates during presidential primaries, which meant underdogs and outsiders like Bill Clinton or Bernie Sanders could stay competitive and build momentum instead of getting knocked out early. And it was because of that path that he had laid, because of his courage, his audacity, that 2 decades later, a young black senator from Chicago's South Side would even be taken seriously as a candidate for the presidential nomination. I still credit that first run of Jesse's and Harold Washington's campaign for drawing me to Chicago. And I didn't know anybody when I first arrived. And I was working as a community organizer, as it so happens, in neighborhoods right around here. Roseland, Woodlawn, Alt Gill, West Pullman. And I'm meeting these young preachers like Meeks and some crazy priest named Flager. And And I guess Jenkins was running around, but he's kind of young. He came a little bit later, so I'm going to churches and I'm listening to all these amazing preachers, and it was hard work, and half the time I didn't know what I was doing, and progress was slow, and I definitely didn't know how I was going to survive these Chicago winters, because I grew up in Hawaii. But I do remember heading to the Push headquarters some Saturday mornings to listen and learn from Reverend Jackson. And y'all remember how on some mornings, if there was a major issue going on, the room would be packed to the rafters. And sometimes some celebrity just wanders in. And then some mornings it was kind of low-key. Either way, though, the announcements would be made, and Reverend Barrow would say a prayer, and Jesse would sit there, and then finally he'd gather himself up and stand, and he'd start kind of slow, you know, and sometimes he'd talk kind of low, so you couldn't quite catch what he was saying, so everybody lean in. And over time, it was that same boundless energy that would emerge, and that same passion and that same insight. And he'd offer you a master class in economics on a Saturday morning. And he'd give you a seminar in American history and American politics. And he'd make complicated things plain. And he'd tell stories that would make you laugh 1 minute and cry the next. And whether you were a bus driver or a teacher or a business leader or a young organizer, you came away from those meetings with a better understanding of how the world worked, how power worked. And more importantly, he made you believe that if we came together, we could make the world work better. Now, we've been talking about Jesse telling us we are somebody. I am somebody. And he wasn't just talking to young black boys like Isaiah, though he loved them fiercely. He wasn't just talking to young black girls to help them believe, though he believed in them. He was talking about everyone who was left out, everyone who was forgotten, everyone who was unseen, everyone who was unheard. And in that sense, he was expressing the very essence of what our democracy should be. The ideals at the very heart of the American experiment. The belief that regardless of what we look like or how we worship, regardless of where our ancestors come from or how much money we got, we're all part of the American family. We're all endowed with the same inalienable rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. We're all obligated to answer the call and step forward and take responsibility for making wrongs right and for caring for our neighbors and bringing the reality of America a step closer to its glorious ideals. And answering that call isn't always easy. And Reverend Jackson and his family knew that better than most. To do what he did, he would endure all kinds of hatred and setbacks and betrayals and doubters and death threats. He would sacrifice, as Jim Reynolds pointed out, the leisure and comfort of what was available to him as a far more financially secure life. And those sacrifices were not his alone. They were shared by his wife and his children. And they bore that burden with grace and strength. I got to know the Reverend and his family over the years, and as I watched his children follow his example of service, I came to appreciate the conviction that drove him and that he had passed on, the faith that guided him and that he had passed on. And it was a faith that didn't waver, a flame that burned bright, even as his body began to fail. The last time he and I had a chance to visit in person, he was already ailing. It was getting difficult for him to stand, difficult for him to speak. We were in Hyde Park, in a hotel room. I embraced him and figured we'd just have a low-key visit. Maybe he'd need some rest. And he starts coming up with this project and this initiative and issues I needed to look into. And here's some commentary that he would suggest, and some phrasing that he thought might work, and maybe we might co-write an article. And listening to him, I couldn't help smiling. Because it took me back. And I started reminiscing with him about those Saturday mornings at Push and the breakfast that he'd host, you know, away from the full meeting. And I didn't get a chance to go to that until I was a state senator, and probably Meeks invited me. So I was like, you know, I was tagging along with Meeks. And he'd pull out a piece of paper. You know, he'd scribbled some stuff, and he'd start passing out assignments and pulling together working groups and asking for updates on the latest campaign. And I'll admit, let's face it, those sessions could run a little long and did not always follow Robert's Rules of Order. But when Jesse called your name and acknowledged you in that room, especially if you were young, especially if you were just coming up, especially if you weren't sure you could pull off what you thought you might be able to do, especially when you needed help. When he did that, you stood up a little straighter. You knew you'd been seen by this giant. He'd laid hands on you and let you know you had a contribution to make. And so that day, I told him how much that meant to me and how much it meant to so many lives that he impacted. And I told him thank you, because I'd always be grateful for that legacy of hope. I know I've gone long. It was going to be much shorter until Isaiah spoke. I figure if a Detroit Piston can take up this much time, it was beautiful, and I mean that. Love me some Isaiah. We are living in a time when it can be hard to hope. Each day we wake up to some new assault on our democratic institutions. Another setback to the idea of the rule of law. An offense to common decency. Every day you wake up to things you just didn't think were possible. Each day we're told by those in high office to fear each other and to turn on each other, and that some Americans count more than others, and that some don't even count at all. Everywhere we see greed and bigotry being celebrated, and bullying and mockery masquerading as strength. We see science and expertise denigrated, while ignorance and dishonesty and cruelty and corruption are reaping untold rewards. Every single day we see that, and it's hard to hope in those moments. So it may be tempting to get discouraged, to give in to cynicism. It may be tempting for some to compromise with power and grab what you can, or even for good people to maybe just put your head down and wait for the storm to pass. But this man, Reverend Jesse Jackson, inspires us to take a harder path. His voice calls on each of us to be heralds of change, to be messengers of hope, to step forward and say, send me. Wherever we have a chance to make an impact, whether it's in our school, or our workplaces, or our neighborhoods, or our cities. Not for fame, not for glory, or because success is guaranteed, but because it gives our life purpose. Because it aligns with what our faith tells us God demands. And because if we don't step up, no one else will. How fortunate we were that Jesse Jackson answered that call. What a great debt we owe to him. May God bless Reverend Jackson. May he rest in eternal peace. God bless you.
President Barack Obama. Well, we might as well stay in Chicago. We're in Chicago, and we had the president from Chicago. We might as well move to the songbird from Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, Jennifer Hudson.
There's an old friend that I once had said something that touched my heart, and it begin this way. I was born by the river in a little tent. Oh, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long, 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 a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Listen. Well, I go to my brother, and I say, brother, brother, help me please. But when I go to my dear brother, he winds up knocking me back down, holding my knees. Big times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but somehow we're able, y'all, to carry on. It's been a long, 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 a long time coming, but change gonna come. Listen, see, there's been times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but right now I'm able, y'all, to carry on. It's been a long, a long time coming, but I know I've changed gonna come. Lord, yes it was. God bless you. God bless the family. We love you.
Come on, one more time, everybody, for the EGOT, Jennifer Hudson. Ladies and gentlemen, the 46th President of the United States, please welcome President Joseph Biden.
Thank you. I think that clock is broken. I'll try to keep this under 2 minutes. The Jackson family, I know we're celebrating a life, but it's a life lost. Having lost a wife and a daughter and a son, it's called out of the blue. It's not easy, no matter how much you loved them, no matter how close you were. So I just like to express my deep sense of, how can I say it, sympathy and understanding. But the big thing is left. He left you something that no one else could. He left you character, judgment, honesty. You can't kid yourselves about what's right and wrong. President Obama, President Mrs. Clinton, Vice President Harris. Jesse believed, the Bible tells us, that they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary.
Come on and preach, Joe.
They shall walk and not grow faint. I hope the hell you all got that, because you're going to need help getting out of here. You know, I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania initially, where the fact that I was an Irish Catholic wasn't a very positive thing to be. And then moved down to Wilmington, Delaware, which is segregated by law, and remained that way for much of my life. And you know, it's interesting that Jesse Jackson, before we knew Jesse Jackson, I was raised with the notion that that hope is all you really have. You can't give up hope. My dad used to say, when you get knocked down, Joey, just get up. Just get up. Well, I was a kid. I was a relatively good athlete, a pretty good student, but I stuttered to talk like that. Now, if I told you all earlier, when I was a kid, I had a cleft palate or a club foot, none of you would have laughed. But it's okay to laugh at stuttering. I'm not being critical of you, but think about it. It's the one place where people think you're stupid. Oh, really? I'm a hell of a lot smarter than most of you. But all kidding aside, it makes you feel really small. Makes you feel really small. And you know, when I moved from Wilmington to Claymont, Delaware, a working-class town, I was surprised. I remember being dropped off at the little Catholic school I went to, 3rd grade. And I watched this bus go by every day. And it passed, I was on the call of Philadelphia Pike connecting Wilmington and Philadelphia. And it passed the turn to the big high school, Claymont High School. And the little Catholic school I went to, Holy Rosie, was right on the corner. I remember saying to my mom, "Mom, why does that happen?" She said, "Well, black kids aren't allowed to go to school with white kids in Delaware." And, you know, the more I thought about that, I thought to myself, how can that be, how can that work? How can that be right? And so, as strange as it sounds, I got involved in being concerned about it. I didn't know a damn thing about the civil rights movement. I was going into 4th grade. But you know what's right and you know what's wrong and you feel it. You know, the fact of the matter is, the man of God and the people throughout the decade of friendship and partnership, I knew Jesse. We were both young. I'm only 83. Here's 80. I'll tell you laughing at. That's 40 times 2 plus. But all kidding aside, we came up through the same time. I knew Jesse, and history remembers him. I knew him as determined and tenacious. I knew him as underrated, undeterred, and unafraid. Not a joke. And more than most, Jesse was dedicated with every fiber in his being to redeeming the soul of America. The soul of America. You know, Jesse and I came up together as leaders in the Democratic Party. We had very different backgrounds, in some cases even different views, but never on race. Sometimes we went at it toe-to-toe. We disagreed on some issues. But that's what I actually admired most about Jesse, his passion. He was passionate. His passion, the courage of his convictions. And you know, his courage inspired a hell of a lot of us, even though we were the same age. You know, with his captivating presence, his stirring words, he would be easy for history to mistake Jesse for a firebrand. I think they'd get it wrong. Jesse certainly created his fair share of good trouble. But through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message was one of unity. That's what he talked about. Through decades of service, Jesse's abiding message of unity moved people in the right direction. Above all, he always sought common ground. I remember telling Jesse that I knew a guy in South Africa that I was going to go see. His name is Nelson Mandela. And Jesse saying, how are you going to guys actually see him? By the way, you know, the continent of Africa is going to be the largest continent in the world in terms of population by the year 2050, the largest in the entire world. Watch, man. Watch. And the fact of the matter was that I remember there were a group of senators going down to, I got elected when I was 29. I wasn't old enough to be sworn in. For real. Some people I wasn't bright enough to be sworn in, but the point was, I had to wait 17 days before I could be eligible to be sworn in as the United States Senator. One of the benefits that had was I wasn't going to leave the Senate. I wasn't going to be sworn in because I got a phone call on December 18th before we were sworn in January that my wife and daughter had just been killed and my 2 boys were going to die. So I decided what I was going to do. There was an accident. There was Christmas shopping, a tractor trailer hit them. So I decided I wasn't going to go to the Senate. And often pointed out to me, I said, you know, my kids can, the state of Delaware can always get another senator. We had a Democratic governor. And, but they can't, my kids can't get another father. But because of a couple of people, start with Teddy Kennedy and a guy named Fritz Hollins from South Carolina, where Jesse was from, and a few others after Hubert Humphrey and others. They put their arm around me and they said, look, just stay for 10 months and then go. Because they knew I was going to be leaving, as Hillary can tell you, and all 3 of them can tell you, is that when you're a freshman, you don't get on the good committees. Committees everybody wants to get on are Appropriations, Finance, Judiciary, and Foreign Relations. So to keep me down there, they put me on 2 really important committees. The Judiciary Committee, which allowed me to appoint the first black justice to the Supreme Court. And the Foreign Relations Committee. The real benefit of that was, I've been around so damn long, I literally, and I'm not being critical of my colleagues, I know more heads of state personally than any other president in history of the United States of America. Which means I know a lot about other countries. I spend a lot of time. But here's the point. You know, the fact is that as I learned, and by the way, I've forgotten more about what Putin does and these guys and Xi than most people know. I've met with Putin for, anyway. And remember, Barack was a great, great man to be vice president for. I really mean it, Barack. Thank you. Barack and I had a deal where we talk with each other every morning we'd be the first two people we talked to. And every night we'd be the last two people we talked to. And Barack would be asking me a question or something. I'd say, well, you know, it's all personal relations. You go, I know, Joe. Enough about all personal relations. But the fact of the matter is, that's why he was such a damn good president. And the whole point of what I'm trying to get at here is that, you know, Jesse did it really well. You got to know people. You got to understand what's on their mind. You got to kind of speak to them. You got to be able to talk to them. And above all, Jesse always saw common ground. Of course, he preached hope because, folks, despite all he endured growing up, despite the pain and disappointment he experienced, Jesse was an optimist at his core. No matter what you say, at his core, he was an optimist. I don't know if it was born out of religious beliefs, I don't know if it was born out of how it arrived, but it arrives in people in different ways. But it mattered a lot. It mattered a lot. He kept the faith with the American people. Every time I moved after I moved from Scranton, we'd go up there and spend the summers up there. Every time I leave my grandpa Ambrose Finnegan's home, he was an All-American football player at Santa Clara when Irish Catholics weren't very much in vogue, except in the mines up there, as Hillary knows that state well. And every time I leave the house, he yelled, "Joey, keep the faith." And my grandmother will know, "Joey, spread it." Well, folks, I had the opportunity to come up in politics at a time with people like Jesse around, and Jesse in particular, where he talked about hope. He talked about hope. He believed in his bones in the promise of America. We're all created equal in the image of God. And we hear this all the time, but I wonder how many people really believe it. He believed everybody deserved to be treated with equally and throughout their lives. And while we've never fully lived up to the promise, I don't think things would have been the same had Jesse not been around, because Jesse decided that his life was ensuring that we never fully walk away from it either. Because there's bad times like now. We're in a tough spot, folks. We got an administration that doesn't share any of the values that we have. And I don't think I'm exaggerating a little bit. So, he knew who we were at our best, and he simply refused to let us off the hook as a party, as a nation, or as individuals. And time and again, through triumph and turmoil, with relentless insistence on what is right and just, he helped lead us closer to fulfilling our nation's promise of restoring the nation's soul. He used his gifts to influence generations of Americans, and countless elected officials, including presidents, as you see here today. And though through his impassioned words on the campaign trail and through moments of quiet courage, Jesse changed history in ways numerous and profound. In fact, I want to thank the Jackson family again, because you don't do it without family. My dad used to have an expression, Miss Jackson. He said, family is the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's all family. And Rainbow Push Coalition, you know, The family, you're just incredible. But I promise you, as much as we're celebrating here, when you leave here, you're still going to go home and you're going to feel a little hole in your heart. He's gone. He's gone. But the only thing I can tell you from experience of losing so many people in my family, the day will come when his memory brings a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. It will come. It will come. And my prayer for you is it'll be sooner than later. Look, you know, at the Legion of Americans, I know there are many who counted Jesse as a mentor, a friend, a hero. Let us be what Jesse called us to be. A margin of hope. Sometimes just a margin. You change people's lives, you change community lives. Lift up this country and light the path to be a nation Jesse always believed we could be. You know, 3 years ago this week, Jesse and I came together once again on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Walk across that bridge. When you stand there, coming from a state like Delaware, you understand what's on the other side when they're waiting there. Thugs on horses waiting to beat the living hell out of you. Well, let me tell you something. We reenacted that a number of times. But this time, Jesse's in a wheelchair. But he's not deterred. His faith renewed his strength. And with faith, he didn't grow weary and didn't let us grow weary. No, he really didn't. I know it sounds strange, but he didn't. I reflected on Jesse's strength and his spirit. Let me close with sharing a hymn that means a lot to the Biden family. Particularly meant a lot to my son, Bo. Bo is a wonderful guy. He should be standing here, not me. Bo was the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, a really decent guy, loved by everyone in the community. Volunteered to go to Iraq, rather than go to Iraq when it was all National Guard. And he died there because he was exposed to those burn pits. Well, you know, this quote meant a lot. And he will raise you up on eagle's wings and bear you on the breath of dawn. And let this light shine upon you like the sun until next time he sees you, will he hold you in the palm of his hand. My prayer for everyone here, and I'm cutting my speech very short because I'm afraid I'm going to be attacked. So folks, I guess I could say it all in one paragraph. Don't give up. I started off every morning as a young man when I got back to Delaware. Every morning, because I got involved in my community, I quit my job with one of the biggest law firms in Delaware, became a public defender. And I spent a lot of time with the community. I was the only white guy who worked on the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. Matter of fact, they named the biggest swimming pool after me, the Biden swimming pool, man. But all kidding aside, I was one of only 13 lifeguards. I was the only white guy. Because I wanted to understand. I thought I knew the issues, but didn't understand the individuals, persons. I remember I had a little Chevette. I remember an all-state halfback I played with. And he said, "Joe, you have a jerry can? You know, a big 5-gallon. He said, "Can I borrow your car?" I said, "You got a car? Sure, you can borrow. What do you need a jerry can for?" He said, "You dumb SOB. I'm going down to see my mother in North Carolina. I can't stop at a gas station." I can't stop at the gas station. The point I'm making is, the more we know one another, the more we understand what we're going through. There's enough decency and human nature in this country to reach out, to help. You know, Jesse kept hope alive for us in his lifetime. And we've got to continue to do it in our lifetime for our children, because there's nothing beyond our capacity when we work together. Nothing, nothing, nothing. So stand up and finish this job.
Come on, let's thank President Biden again, everybody. As we continue with the expressions, we welcome the one and only Reverend Al Sharpton, after which Dr. Jim Zogby will come. Please welcome them.
Thank you. I've heard all through our service, first giving honor and regard to the Jackson family and to the matriarch of liberation, Mrs. Jacqueline Lavinia Jackson. As I listened and thought about, everyone quoted the slogan of Reverend Jackson, but I want to, in my few minutes, and if you take Brother Biden's minutes and other minutes, I come out of the Jackson School of Thought. They told me 4 minutes, which means 8 in Jacksonian language. I don't want us, Yusef, to leave here having mourned and then mock what Jackson was all about. We're sitting here acting like our own lack of rising to what he wanted us to be is the reason we are sitting on the brink of some of the most serious Reconstruction behavior being rescinded that we've seen in modern times. To leave here and not follow an assignment would not be what Jesse Jackson taught us. To make us feel good, we went to Jesse Jackson's funeral, and that we said nice things about Mrs. Jackson, but people at the same time are killing illegal immigrants. People at the same time are cutting public funding. At the same time, Affordable Care Act is not being renewed and seniors have to deal with premiums. Don't sit here so holy and sanctified and act like you have no assignment yourself. Jesse and Jacqueline Jackson did theirs. Do you realize they were born, he in South Carolina, her in Florida, when it was against the law? I'm not talking about a custom. It's against the law to ride in certain buses, against the law to use a toilet downtown, against the law for you to eat in certain restaurants. And these two Southern-born, raised in Southern American apartheid, went on and put 2 of their sons in Congress, broke down barriers of voting. They did theirs. They planted a platform that led to an empowerment, and we are the generations behind them that have returned to those that were against us being empowered. Oh, they went against the Southern bigots in the overalls We're dealing with manicured Fifth Avenue bigots. I remember I was 12 years old. I was a boy preacher in the Church of God in Christ. Bishop Sheard knew my bishop, Bishop Washington. Bishop Washington, my mother was concerned I was getting into politics. They brought us to Reverend William Jones. His daughter's traveling with us. And Reverend Jones introduced me to Jesse Jackson. I became his youth director in New York at 13. I liked Reverend Jackson because he was a little hipper than the older preachers. He was 27, I was 13 by the time I became youth director. So he was like a father figure to me. When I got about 40, he said, quit calling me father, call me big brother. But what I liked about it is that he didn't have the background others had. He didn't come from generations of preachers. So those of us that didn't have that pedigree, didn't have that background, could relate. And he talked about economics, and he talked about discipline. He would not let us make excuses. I would call him and say we're doing certain things and they're attacking us in the press. He said, oh, another pity party. He never cared when we felt we were being unfairly attacked. But I never will forget 1994. We went to Dakar, Senegal, and James Meeks and Jesse Jr. and I had dinner with him that night. And that's where he said, Al, Meeks, Jesse Jr., y'all are my disciples. And we said, disciples? And for years, we joked each other. I'd cover the room, and Junior say, here's disciple number one, and Meeks. But discipleship meant you carried forth the vision. The next day, he took me on the ferry to Goree Island, Mrs. Jackson, and on Goree Island, he showed me where the slave camps were. And I will never forget, he said, Al, you see what that artifact is? I said, what's that? He said, they call it the door of no return. When you go through that door, you either made it to America to slavery or you died in the Atlantic. The door of no return. But I talked to him about 3 years ago, and I reminded him, I said, remember when you brought me to the door of no return? He said, yeah. I said, well, we did return. We returned the President of the United States, Barack Obama. We returned the Vice President, Kamala Harris. We returned with businessmen. They thought they sent us as slaves. We came back as global liberators. The problem is that too many of us did not join the movements that sponsored us. And there was a breakout in 2024 called Negro Amnesia, where you forgot where you came from and forgot how you got where you got. Therefore, they're trying to take back everything you have. I asked Michael Eric Dyson, our prominent scholar, where in history is this? He said, we always go one step forward and two backward. Well, here we are now. The problem is not Trump. The problem is us. We are allowing ourselves to be lowered and our children to feel inferior because you don't have an I am somebody person. You got our artists calling our women bees. Our others calling us niggas. What happened to us? What happened to black and proud? What happened? I'm gonna vote. What happened? Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. What happened to us? We believed our way, and we had the faith to do it. And that's why my challenge to you is that we should do what Jesse Jackson did. Not look at what you can see, but look at what you can believe even if you can't see it. Sitting up here talking about, oh, they got all the power, we can't win. We gotta win. Because they put the seeds of victory in us. If we just nurture them and grow, Hakeem Jeffries be the Speaker of the House. If we keep on winning, we'll get the Senate back. If we keep winning, we can save health care for our grandmamas. If we keep winning, we can bring about criminal justice reform. If we keep winning, we can have 2 Jackson boys in the Congress. We didn't come this far to turn around now. Reverend Sharp, pastor fellowship, I was talking to him. And I said, Reverend Sharp, I was saying, Reverend Sharp, Jesse Jackson talked about keep hope alive. And I met a man that Reverend Jackson admired called Adam Clayton Powell when I was a kid. And Adam had a slogan called Keep the Faith, Baby. And I'd like, Tyler Perry's here. He canceled something to be with us. I'd like one day Tyler to do a whole thing on it, Adam Powell, because there's a little risque side to Adam that Tyler know how to handle that kind of stuff. And between Jesse Jackson's slogan of keep hope and Adam's slogan of keep faith is what I challenge us and the Jackson family to do. Because my mother told me in my engine, I had 2 gears, hope and fear. Hope is that I hope a better day will come. Hope is I won't give up. Hope is that we come this far by faith. But she said, but sometime it's going to get dreary. And that's when your gear goes to faith. Faith is the substance of things you hope for, not hope for. The evidence of things not seen. Faith is when the doctors give up, but you hold on for another doctor. Faith is when you got bills to pay and no money to pay them. Faith is when they write you off and when they write you back. We come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord. Or they getting ready to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the country, but we were not free in 1776. It is not our celebration. We got here in 1619. We worked 246 years and never got paid, but we are still here. We come this far by faith. It was against the law to read and write. It was against the law to marry, but we come this far by faith. I don't care what they do in Washington. I care what we do in the community. We beat people bigger than Trump. We fought people harder than them if we stand up and be what we're supposed to be. Private sector saying they're going to end diversity, equity, and inclusion. Reverend Sharp, we started Wall Street. Wall Street, dealing with diversity. So you don't want a diversity in your boardroom, then don't have a diversified consumer base. So what I'm urging you to do is leave here with some Jackson fire in you. Not just a program book, but to say I see the things the way they are, but I'm going to turn and change them. Have some Jackie Jackson fire saying I'm going to raise my kids beyond your expectation. I'm going to rise up anyhow. But Reverend, it looks bad now. Look at Iran. Look at what's going on in Minnesota. Look on. Yeah, but I was raised by them to realize that after storms, if we do the right thing in the storm, if we organize, if we register, if we do what we're supposed to do, there's always a rainbow coming out. The rainbow don't show until the storm is over. The rainbow gonna come out in November. The rainbow gonna come out in 28. We're gonna fix these tricks in 26 and march through the gates in 28. We didn't come this far to turn around now. We won't go back. We won't go back. We won't go back.
At best, I can say this is a tough act to follow. I feel like Liz Taylor's sixth husband. He knew what to do, but he wasn't sure how to make it interesting. So I have a challenge right now, and I ask you to bear with me because I'm not a preacher. But I have been thinking about and feeling deep feelings about Reverend Jackson for the last several days, because I've been with him, working with him for almost 5 decades. Actually started with his campaign in 1983 when he came up to me at a dinner, hands on my shoulders behind me, and he said, I need you to come work with me. I'm going to run for president. And I said, but Reverend, I've been organizing my community for the last 4 years. I can't give that up. And he said, we'll do more for your community in the next 4 months than you've been able to do in the last 4 years. It was like a calling in the biblical sense. And it mattered. And thank God my wife and I talked about it and were convinced it was the right thing to do. And I did it. Because you have to understand the experience of my community before then was that no one in the Democratic Party would even meet with us. They would not have a meeting with us. And candidates were given money back. And candidates rejected our endorsements. And if they found an Arab American on their staff, some people would say, get him off, and they'd fire him. And in 1983, the 20th anniversary of the March on Washington, I was thrilled to be asked to be on the National Steering Committee of the March. Some groups said, if you let the Arabs march, we're not marching, and we were asked to leave. But Reverend Jackson fought to keep us on. I never forgot that. And so, when I did join the campaign in 1983, some groups came and met with Reverend Jackson and said, you got to get rid of Zogby. It's in Abby's new book. And he stood by me. I was quite disturbed, and I said, I don't want to be the target. I'm going to quit. Reverend, I just don't think you need the aggravation. I certainly don't need it in my life. I'll never forget what he said. He said, do not quit because you give them what they want. What they're most afraid of is that you stick around and fight. And so I did. And I'm so proud that I did, because to see him go around the country and meet with Arab Americans who had been the despised and the rejected, and the excitement on their face that somebody came and talked to him, that somebody was saying Arab American, that somebody was talking about Palestinians, that somebody was talking about the suffering of the Lebanese, that somebody cared to come to them, was so important. It energized, he energized an entire community. When he said our time has come, it was our time too. And he meant it for us. And I'll never forget him for that, because he made a difference for me, for my family, and for people across the Middle East. He was a unique character. He was as comfortable walking the streets of Cairo or Jerusalem or Hebron as he was in Chicago. It was really quite stunning to see the reaction that he got from people wherever he went. There was a power that he had. And I've thought a lot about that power. Where did it come from? Yes, Jackie, it came from you, and I know that because I saw what you did to buck him up sometimes when he needed it. But the power came from someplace else. It came from, I think, two places that I'd point to. One of them is that he carried the weight of generations on his shoulders, as Isaiah said. He felt the pain of his own personal history and of the history of his people. And when he walked down the street, when he spoke, people knew that that power was there. That there was something in the tonal quality of his voice that said, this is important. What he's saying speaks to me. There was something else I think that was important in his worldview, and that was he was part of a generation that didn't just see America as the arena of his activity. He was a global individual. When he went to Africa, when he went to the Arab world, when he went to Asia or the Americas, he felt part of that world. He was part of almost the national liberation consciousness that existed. He did not go into the nationalist direction, but he fused together being American with being a person in the world. And so watching him meet with Saudis or Kuwaitis or meet with Palestinians in occupied Hebron, or in Jerusalem, we went in 1994, President Clinton, after the Oslo Accords, he went to Jerusalem because Palestinians had invited him to a peace conference. He wanted to encourage them to keep peace. The Israelis surrounded the hotel with troops, and Rabin said, you cannot leave the hotel, and you cannot go to Orient House, you cannot do a political meeting with Palestinians in the city. You know what Jesse did? He said, we're marching through the troops. And he walked right through the lines. I was scared stiff. I mean, I said, oh my God, this is crazy. I know you do it in the South and get away with it. You don't do this in Jerusalem. But you know what happened? The young Israeli soldiers, they wanted their pictures taken with them. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to be near him. And the Israeli commanders were, get away from him. Whenever, they couldn't stop their soldiers from wanting to be next to the power of Jesse Jackson. And the Palestinian reaction was amazing. I have to tell you one thing, just final thing here. He freed Robert Goodman. But guess what? I have the distinction on my resume of being the person to tell him not to go. He asked me to do the research, and I said, Assad is not going to meet with you, and you're not going to get Goodman. And I thought, I did my job. He went. And he went because he knew that if he got into Syria, there's no way they would not meet with him. And if he got to sit with Assad, there was no way that he would not bring Goodman back, because that was the power that he had. And it worked. And so I am here to celebrate the fact that his fight for inclusion included us. And here to celebrate the power of the man that he used for others. Because that's the difference. When you use your power, if your power is money, if your power is armies, if your power is, like some people's, transactional, right? Then it's one thing. But if your power is for others, you have the ability to make change and have people, your power grows actually, because people know you are with them and for them and of them. And that's who this man was. I thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, all you guys, for all you've done. And I so appreciate the fact that I've been a part of your family now for all this time. And one final thought, and at 80 years old, you know, I lose, I don't know what the thought is anymore. So I'm going out on a whimper here, because I can't remember what I was going to say, but I think it was important, but I'll remember it after I leave the stage. Listen, thank you all very much.
So many of us have so much to say, and we're so filled and so full that we overflow because Reverend Jackson poured so much into all of us. We're looking forward to hearing from the family, but at this moment, please welcome the 42nd President of the United States of America, President William Jefferson Clinton.
Whoa. I'm actually going to be pretty close to on time. I think we should not forget, and Jim Zogby didn't, he did a fine job, but this is a celebration and a memorial service. And you have to ask yourself, what did Jesse Jackson do that I admire most, that moved me most, and what can I do right now that would maybe be as good as what he did then? That's what we're all facing here. I love Jackie and her family. Santita sang at my second inauguration. The boys have got to go to Congress, and Yusuf, I thought when the first time I met Yusuf, I thought, I could do whatever I wanted if he worked for me. He'd just take care of things. And you're good at it. It's been an honor to know all of you. But I want to say something, highly personal tonight. I came to truly love Jesse Jackson. And we had more in common than he thought. We were both two guys who were born to single mothers living in the South. And so I got to watch this guy, and frankly, the first time we met was at the 20th anniversary of the celebration of the integration of Little Rock Central High School. And some young people may not even know why that's important. But in the 1920s, that school was voted the most beautiful high school in America. During the whole time I was governor of Arkansas, that one school accounted for 25% of our merit scholars. You could go there and study Latin and Greek, which was a pretty big deal out in the country, in addition to all the science and math. So they were celebrating the 20th anniversary, and Jesse showed up to help them. But he was always asking himself, what can we use the observation of a past victory for to get something done today? So by the late 70s, all these medium-sized and little towns in the middle of the country were being flooded with drugs. All these folks were facing more vigorous law enforcement on the coast, but they were coming in. And I kept thinking, I know Jesse Jackson's going to know this, and he's going to say something. And I just want to be there. And I was a 29-year-old attorney general. And Hillary, a Chicago girl, was she was practicing law and supporting us because the salary was almost non-existent. So Jesse gets up in front of this crowd of kids, and their eyes were big as dollars. And he said, you owe a lot to the Little Rock Nine who integrated this school. You owe a lot to Daisy Bates and the other people who supported them. You owe a lot to the people who were there long before them. cannot take this achievement and throw it away on drugs. And then he said, I'll never forget it. And I thought, where are all the conservatives when you need them to cheer? Jesse Jackson looked at these kids and he said, you have to open your brains, not your veins. And I thought to myself, no matter how long I live and stay in politics, I may never have a single line that's that good. I mean, think about it. It's totally brilliant. It captures personal responsibility and caring and self-survival. All these pastors here who've done such a great job on this, you know, I know you spend endless hours when you're putting your sermons together and you're running your programs in your churches and things. What can we do that will work? And whenever I get discouraged, I think about Jesse and I just laugh. Well, you got to open your brains and not your veins. So 10 years later, I was living in the governor's mansion. And Jesse shows up for the 30th anniversary of the integration of Little Rock Central High School. By then, I become governor, and we bring all of them back to the governor's mansion because that's where Governor Faubus plotted to disenfranchise them and keep black people out of school. So we had a big dinner that night. And after the dinner was over, Hillary asked Jesse to hang around so we could talk. We went to the kitchen, put some more food on the counter, and talked till midnight. And Hillary said, you know, we all got to work tomorrow. I'm going to bed. 2 hours later, Jesse and I are still going about it. And she walks into the kitchen and throws us out. I'll never forget it. We did not always agree, but I'll tell you one thing. He made me a better president when I got in office. Because he was always pushing on things. And he knew that change came from the outside in and sometimes from the inside out. So he knew how to keep pushing and nagging and wearing you out. Right? Look at Governor Pritzker laughing here. I mean, it was like having a dog to the bone, you know. He was, I said one time when he was working on something in Africa, because I made him a special envoy for African diplomacy, I said, you know, we might ought to put Jesse on the list. And one of my said, only members of Congress are on that list. I know, but I said, I think we need to put him on anyway. And they said, so I had another guy that was there and said, what the list is? He said, it's a list of people that'll dog you to death until you do what they want you to do. So we just call it the Just Say Yes list. Put it on the Just Say list. It saves you so much time, and you can go on and do something else with your day. And I remember how impressed I was in 1988, before I became president, when Jesse and negotiated with Governor Dukakis and the other people at the Democratic Convention to end the exclusive primaries, which you talked about it, and the caucuses, and to open up the democratic process and add people, including Willie Barrow. And Representative Maxine Waters, who became one of our senior leaders. I'm saying this to make another point. Everybody knows how eloquent he was, and everybody knows that he could talk an owl out of a tree. But he actually was interested in policy, in specifics. So that's the second thing I'd like to say. So what if you weren't big, tall, broad-shouldered, and eloquent like Jesse Jackson? If you want to make change, there's still plenty you could do if you've got an agenda. You've got to have it. He always had an agenda. So, that's the most important thing I could say to you. Now, one other thing I am going to say. Wordsworth, you don't think about Wordsworth when you think about Jesse. But Wordsworth said the last best hope of a good man's life are the little unremembered acts of kindness and love. So, I used to think all the time about how hard Jesse's childhood must have been, you know, with his mother and then having to go past his father's house and all that, and all the mixed up. And I knew a little about not nearly as severe a situation because of my situation. And I admired his mother. I was afraid of Jackie. I'd do whatever she said for the baby. But I love you so much. But I liked his mother. And he called me one day and he said, this is purely personal. But my mother liked you, you know, and I'd really appreciate it if you would speak at her service. And he said, Andy Young's coming, and you know there aren't that many of us left anymore who are over 75 and have been through all this. And I said, I would be honored. I know this sounds funny, but it really meant something to me that he wanted me to talk at his mother's memorial service. And then, I don't think I've ever told anybody this. When the Congress was trying to run me out, and I was in that big impeachment fight, Jesse called me one night in the White House. I thought he was calling me. He said, I don't want to talk to you. I want you to go get Chelsea. Now keep in mind, he's got all this other stuff going on. We got all this stuff. He called me to talk to my daughter to make sure she had her head in the game. And he prayed with her on the phone. And you know, a lot of people, it would never even have occurred to them to do that. And ever since Hillary and I went to visit Jesse in the hospital and Jackie and a lot of the family were there, I've been thinking about him, calling my daughter. He didn't know if I was going to be president in 6 months. He didn't know what was going to happen. But he liked Chelsea. I thought showed he had good taste. But my point is, those are the things you remember. So I think we should honor him by saying, okay, maybe I'll never come up with a line like, open your brains and not your veins. Maybe I'll never give a speech that will move hundreds of thousands, but I can do something. I can still be somebody. And what should I do? And how can I, with whatever speaking ability I have or don't have, do what he did when he calls Bill Clinton's daughter in a crisis? When he asked a friend, I know you may be busy and my mother's not famous, but would you please come say a few words? And Andy Young and I went, we both went, and we were there. So that's what I want all of you to think about when you leave here. This guy lived a big life. He lived with his head and with his heart. He was faithful to the scripture which said, we have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But unlike a lot of people in politics, he didn't go around looking down his nose at other people. He hated the sin and not the sinner. He was always trying to lift people up. So I'm here more as a friend than a former president. He was my friend when I needed it. And I ask you to ask yourselves how you can do more by being a better friend and a more effective one. God bless you and thank you.
Come on, let's thank President Clinton again for those remarks. Reverend Jackson believed that women deserved equal pay. Reverend Jackson believed women deserved equal opportunity. Reverend Jackson believed that women should hold the highest roles and positions in the land. The first woman, the first African American woman, the first Asian American woman, Vice President Kamala Harris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mrs. Jackie, and to the entire Jackson family, on behalf of Doug and my family, we pray with you as we did a couple weeks ago in your home, and we thank you. I thank you. So let me just say, I predicted a lot about what's happening right now. I'm not into saying I told you so, but we did see it coming. But what I did not predict is that we would not have Jesse Jackson with us right now to help us get through this. And this afternoon has been such a beautiful remembrance of his spirit, his life, and his faith. And in a way that Reverend Al talked about it and so many others have, I do think of this afternoon as what it is doing for me to renew my faith in what is possible, fueled by the hope that Jesse Jackson so often reminded us of. I'm reminded of a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 7. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. And so from a young age, we know that Reverend Jackson saw that the doors had been closed to the millions of people across our nation and throughout the world who were otherwise so deserving. And they were doors, of course, to opportunity, to equity, to justice, to freedom. And so he dedicated his life, as we all know, to breaking down those barriers. So when we are speaking of these doors, I will share with you that as a child, I was raised that when you see a closed door, you must knock and wait to be invited in. What life has taught me is that if that invitation is not offered, and if that door remains shut, even after repeated attempts to knock on said door, sometimes you have no choice but just to kick that door open. Reverend Jackson was impatient. He did not waste time waiting. Even when the doors in front of him were barred and bolted, even if those on the other side hesitated or even ignored him, he always devised a way through. Jesse Jackson was a strategist. He was one of the most effective community and political organizers of our time. And he was the founder, I think most would agree, the founder of the modern progressive coalition. Think about the work that he did. In addition to the strength of his spirit and his determination, the leadership of Jesse Jackson was defined by his vision, dare I say his ambition, to tap into what otherwise had been untapped in terms of the potential of a coalition of seemingly different people who could be brought together around shared values and ideals and experience. That's what Jesse Jackson did. He modeled that for so many of us. Over the past half century, that coalition strategy, his methodology, has been the heartbeat for so many movements about progress in our country. Those movements born out of struggle, but resulting in progress. Think about, and it was mentioned, the women leaders that he elevated, like the self-described colored girls, who have been a driving force behind so many campaigns that have been about freedom and justice. Throughout his life, Reverend Jackson reminded us that the many fights for freedom are interconnected. He saw not only the interconnection, but the interdependence of the various struggles for justice and dignity on behalf of Black Americans, Native and Asian Americans, Latino, LGBTQ Americans, and Americans with disabilities. That was Jesse's rainbow, and he continued to grow it. He gave us the language, the rainbow, to understand, as has been said, the beauty that comes after the storm when we see what is possible and what can be unburdened by what has been. As he once said, when a barrier falls for one of the locked out, it opens the doors for all. And that is what he told me, and what he taught me, and how he inspired me. I was a student at Howard University, you know, when Jesse Jackson was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, and me and my classmates would go out on the mall every weekend and protest, looking at Jesse Jackson as a model of what that movement should and could have been. I was a law student then in 1988 when Jesse Jackson decided to run again. I was the first Black woman elected district attorney of San Francisco. I was the first Black woman elected district attorney in the state of California in 2004, when I created one of the first in the nation initiatives as a prosecutor that was about getting jobs and counseling to those who had been in the criminal justice system. And at the time, the powers that be told me I was not supposed to, told me I was not doing that. They said, why are you letting people out of jail when you're supposed to put them back in? Jesse Jackson spent a lot of time in the Bay Area, many of you may know. I saw Butch Wing here. And Butch, together with Jesse Jackson, would visit with me during those earliest days of my elected career to give me the support and the confidence and the initiative to think about how, in a position such as being DA, I could continue the idea about what it means to build coalition around a group of people whose dignity must be seen and the resources that must be put into them. Jesse Jackson, from my first elected position to when I ran with Joe Biden for Vice President of the United States, and when I became the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, always told me and convinced me that everything that we were doing is possible. And so I just want to share what I brought today. I brought with me two momentums from Jesse Jackson's campaign that I have saved since I was a student. So one is this button that reads Jesse Jackson 88. The other, some of you who were around at the time may remember, is this button. I will read it to you, and pastors, please forgive me. It reads as follows, all caps. Damn straight, exclamation point. It's time for a black presidential candidate. That was a Jesse Jackson pin from those days. And just a beautiful example of his determination, his sense of humor, but his ability to see what can be unburdened by what has been. And I thank you, Jesse Jackson, for your service to our nation and the world. Well done, good and faithful servant. Well done. Thank you.
What a joy and a privilege to have